I'd like to welcome you all this evening to this fantastic institution. Founded in 1799, and as an Irish person coming to London, I am always fascinated by the enormous history in this resident in this city, and how important a role the UK has played as a leader in the last, 700 or 800 years. The number of meetings that I go to that just resonate with hundreds and hundreds of years of history is astonishing. So look, I'd like to welcome you all this evening on a pretty dirty evening out there. Thank you for joining us. I want to start with a personal story. I'm here to say a little bit about vision and to introduce Charles. But about a month ago, I was at a training session for my son's Gaelic hurling team. Those of you who have watched a bit of Sky Sports in the last few years may have some knowledge of hurling. It's a very, very physical game. And as he gets older, he's 10, as he gets older, he's got a slight frame. And so he's struggling to keep up with the bigger guys. And the smaller guys usually either get put into the forwards in the corner where they can be, they don't get the rough stuff. And that's where he normally plays, and he wants to be a forward. But this night the coach said, "Patrick, I want you to play in defence." And at the end of the session, the coach came up to me and said, he was absolutely brilliant. He got 2 or 3 blocks in, and he was astonishing. And hurling is interesting because it's very physical, but it's very skillful. Anyway, on the way home in the car, Patrick said to me, "Dad, I think I want to play in defence from now on." And I said, "Patrick, you've always wanted to be a forward." And he said, "Yeah, Dad, but I think I should play in defence." And I said, "Look, why don't you learn the full range of skills in hurling and then choose?" But I was thinking about that conversation and thinking that that's a little bit like what vision does. So much of the time we look at the world through the lens of our skills and our practices. And when we change our skills and practices, we change the way we look at the world. And one of the things that vision does is it goes into companies and right at the front end of business or projects start to change the practices that people have. And underneath our logo are 2 words, fast and thinking. And what happens when you change those practices is you start to produce results very quickly. But you also start to produce a different kind of thinking. And people suddenly see whole new opportunities, whole new ways of doing things, whole new ways of collaborating with each other that produce long-term results. And ultimately, we're in the business of transforming cultures. So we start by producing some results very, very quickly in the area of improving sales on large capital projects, reducing the time for large capital projects, reducing the cost by as much as 30%. And by working with leadership teams who are ambitious enough to want to lead their industry. And we make the following assessment of our work. Concrete results in 12 weeks. Can we produce a 25% improvement in 12 weeks in sales? Not incremental, like 10%, 25%. Whatever you spend on us in a 12-month period, you will make back in that period. And you should expect a 5-time return on your investment within 2 years. Do we do that every time? No. But it's the measure that we set for ourselves on projects. And we expect to do that at least 3 out of 4 times. That's a fairly big claim. Let me give you one example and then set to introducing Charles. I don't know how many of you came on the tube this evening. But between 2004 and 2005, we took all of the graffiti off London Underground trains. And we took all of the chewing gum off the floors. So if you're going home on the tube this evening, take a look and see if you can see any graffiti or chewing gum. And nearly 10 years later, it stayed off. Now let me move to introducing Charles. Charles and I have worked together Charles has worked in Vision for the last 12 years, but he and I have collaborated for closer to 20 years. He's the leader in the development of our intellectual property, published widely on challenging topics, the real issues to do with leadership. How do you rebuild trust in the banking sector? How can banks really rebuild trust with their customers? And Charles, although he's the leading developer of intellectual property, he does it by working at the coalface. He does it by getting into the heart of projects, producing the results, and getting the material to publish. I'll tell you one story. Digicel is one of the fastest growing mobile telcos in the world. It operates in about 30 companies, and it's owned by an Irish guy called Dennis O'Brien. Dennis built his first telco and sold it to BT for $3 billion. And then he opened up in Jamaica. And his proposition was so strong that within 6 weeks, he had met his 12-month targets. And he decided to grow into other countries in the Caribbean. And by the time he was in his third company, he came to me and said, look, I don't know what I'm doing here. He said, we had a fantastic business in Jamaica. And he said, now I find that I'm in 2 more countries. And he said, the CEO has told me I need a head office of 170 people. And he said, I just don't make sense of it. He said, maybe I'm just good at growing businesses, not managing them. And he said, look, go away and find me the best telco in the world to model ourselves on, and tell me what the size of our head office is. And he said, all my management are saying we need more structure, more discipline, more rigor. I should not be going to the managing meetings. I need formalized reports, because if we want to grow to be a global company, that's what you need to do. And we did the first set of interviews, and the first report that I gave to them said pretty much that. And I remember leaving the meeting with Dennis and his partner Leslie Buckley saying, you know what, I'm copping out. I'm copping out. This is a fairly standard consulting report. And we'd done all our interviews. And I remember Charles was getting on a flight that day to come to the UK. And I called him for help. I said, Charles, I'm not happy with what we've produced here. Can you do something? And he said, well, I haven't done any of the interviews. I said, look, I'll email all the interviews to you. I'll get them printed out, and you can read them on the flight overnight. But I need some kind of different answer, because I'm not happy. Anyway, he calls me when he gets off the flight, and he said, look, we have it all wrong. Tear up what you said before. We need to get them to totally change the way that they manage themselves. He said they're trying to put in structures using people with professional disciplines. But he said what's interesting about this company is the style of the CEO. What makes them different as a telco is the unique characteristics of the CEO. And he said, we're going to turn it on our head, and we're going to say the top people in your organization are going to be modeled on this CEO style. Today, Digicel are in 30 countries. They're still one of the fastest growing telcos in the world. And that is the kind of thing that Charles does. Goes into organizations, takes a very different look on it based on our thinking, and comes up with radical approaches. And with that introduction, I'd like you to welcome Charles Spinoza.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Billy, for that kind introduction. It brought back lots of memories of that flight in particular. Thank you for coming out on a rainy night. Since I'm the one standing between you and dinner, I will not introduce much anymore. I'll just go straight to it. So my talk tonight is on practical innovation. That's something that started when I wrote my book on innovation back in the 90s. And we've been trying to find a simpler and simpler and simpler way to enable people to innovate. And in our leadership development workshops, anybody who's made it to the 4th workshop in our leadership development has already had a taste of this. And this is sort of the best way that we have found to help leaders become practical innovators. We believe that transformational leaders need to be able to do that, to innovate on their own. So the first thing I want to say is, what stands in the way of practical innovation? The thing that most stands in the way of innovation is what we normally think innovation is. And I have some of my favorite innovations. We normally think that it takes lots of technological knowledge. And so I have the iPhone. I have, since I spent a lot of time in the 80s, a decade approximately, and people were dying of AIDS. I have the AIDS drugs up there, and I have something that I'm sure you're all going to have in your garage very, very soon, the Koenigsegg Quant, which is a solar-powered car that's coming out. So that's how we normally think of innovation. And for tonight at least, and given where we are, it is probably appropriate to think of innovation that way. But tonight I'd like to change it. Most commercial innovations are practical innovations. They're changes in the way we do things. So I'm going to stand up and give you a little bit of a definition. A practical innovation occurs when we change our current practices in a simple but valuable way. And generally, we take a minor part of some practice that seems very important, emphasize that part, standardize it, and that new standardized practice leads us enormous wealth and becomes enormously valuable. I'm going to give you an example of how we got to paper currency, which was a practical innovation. And I'll tell you the story in how we in Europe came to currency. In China, it turns out they did it in much the same way. But I like our story because our story has knights, romantic knights, and it has actually 3 practical innovations in it. So the first practical innovation was and it's the Knights Templar. Do you all know the job of the Knights Templar? Okay. The first job of the Knights Templar was to protect pilgrims as they went on their pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Why did you, I mean, back in those days, the king's peace hardly extended to highways, and it was very easy to be robbed and killed. And in fact, the penalty for being robbed, or the penalty for robbing someone was identical to the penalty for killing someone. So if you're going to rob them, you might as well kill them. Makes it hard for them to get back at you. So very dangerous times. Knights Templar had a real job, and keeping people safe was difficult. But they were also keeping the goods that the pilgrims carried with them safe. They ended up building castles all along the route, and they ended up asking the people, the pilgrims, to put their goods, their wealth, basically inside one of those castles. And they gave them a letter of exchange, saying these are all the goods that we have, these are all the coins we have, this is the wealth we have. So that's the first innovation, from taking care of lives, which looks like a pretty important job, to taking care of goods. And guess what? When you take care of the goods of the people, they're attacked far less. There's nothing to steal. So it was that switch, what seemed important, taking care of lives, to taking care of goods. That was the first practical innovation. But you're wondering where paper currency comes out of that. Okay, well, as I say, they gave people these letters of exchange. So-and-so has so much here. Well, the idea was you could then go to the next castle and the next castle and say, here's my letter of exchange, give me so many coins, give me so much gold, and so forth, because I want to go buy something. And that's how it worked. But then people realized, why do I have to go to each castle to get more gold? Why don't I just sign over my letter of exchange to the party that I'm buying goods from? And they did, and that's the next practical innovation. It seemed like this was a letter that would give you access to your gold coins and so forth, but it was also a letter that could give somebody else access to those coins, and the letter itself became valuable. So that's the beginning of currency. There's one last step that it took actually 600 years to achieve, but I need to tell it, and that is, so you have people using letters of currency essentially as checks, and just think of the information processing nightmare that is, particularly if it's endorsed by a number of people and goes through a number of hands. Next innovation was, well, what's important is not who started to have this money and all the hands it went through. What's important is the guy showing up at your castle doorstep and asking for the money. And that led to the final development that gives you paper currency, and you can see it at the top of your paper currency. It is, well, maybe, yes. It's right here. I promise to pay the bearer on demand. Once you have that, you have currency. So this is a whole set of practical innovations where something that seemed the unimportant feature became the important feature, and you get currency. I find that a very cool story. I find it a very cool process. I hope you do too, because what I'm going to ask is that we make ourselves tonight, at least as we think about it, into practical innovators. And the question is how? Well, find something seemingly unimportant that you are doing that might be valuable. You do that by asking questions that we normally repress because we have to do what's important. And then once you do that, just use a little imagination to bring out the value and standardize it. And here's what I'm offering. I'll ask the 5 questions that have worked best in our leadership development or with entrepreneurs and supply some motivating stories to get you doing it. It's that simple. Okay? First question. What action are you constantly chasing others to perform? I know that everybody in this room spends time chasing some group of people to do something. We run into it all the time in business. So keep in mind what that is, and I'm going to tell you what Ray Davis did in his case. Ray Davis, by the way, is the CEO of Umpqua Bank. Umpqua Bank calls itself the greatest bank in the world, and in terms of customer service, it is the greatest bank in the world, and we've taken tons of clients to see Ray Davis at Umpqua Bank. In 2007, Ray Davis, the CEO, making customer service his competitive advantage, was constantly chasing his EVPs, executive vice presidents, to answer customer complaints. And this is what he says. He says, if I get a letter or email and a customer is having some sort of problem, I'll turn it over to the EVP of retail, if he's the appropriate guy, and ask him to take care of it right away. And I'll keep a copy of the original so I can follow up. I tell him to let me know when he's taking care of it so I can take it off my to-do list. And if I see him later in the day, I'll ask if he's handled it. And if he hasn't yet, I'll say, I want it done before you leave today. These people are waiting for a response. To us, it may seem like small potatoes, and we'll get around to it next week. Bull. To the customer, it's a big problem. Okay, so here he is chasing his EVPs, feeling very strongly that they ought to be getting back to customers the same day that the complaint is issued. What do you do? What's the practical innovation? Well, what he figured out a way to do was to make the inaction of his EVPs very visible. Visible to important people, customers, shareholders. Here's how he did it. He put in every branch, and since he considers it a retail kind of business, he calls them every store, a phone, highly decorated phone, with a direct line to his office. Think about it. Think about it from two perspectives. What if you're the customer and you know you can talk to the CEO of the bank? That's pretty cool. Now think of why it's so effective. Suppose you're the branch manager and there's a prominent phone over there and you see a customer walking over to that phone. I think the point is clear. Right? You're going to intercede. And so how many calls does he get? He gets maybe one a week. Except the first week he put this in place where all the journalists in all the cities where he had the bank called all the time. But, you know, that's the problem with journalists. So what's happened? Well, you call him directly, and he's seen with these kinds of customer service innovations, he's seen his bank grow from 150 million in deposits to more than 9 billion in deposits, and it's still growing. I know there are bankers here in the room who would consider 70 billion in deposits pocket change. So he has a way to grow. But every year, the pundits and analysts have said he's going to have to give up that phone. He can't do this any longer, and it has remained year after year after year. Okay, so that's my first motivating story. The question is, what action are you constantly chasing others to perform? Make it visible. Let's go to another. And we're moving from the United States to the UK. It's a simple question. What do you do to get yourself in the mood to work? And that was a question that essentially was asked by John Wright, Adam Ballin, and Richard Reeden. I suspect you don't know who they are. To their parents, they're guys who graduated from Cambridge and got great jobs. John and Adam became top consultants, and Richard went into advertising. But they didn't like their jobs. They met every Saturday because they wanted to be entrepreneurs and they wanted to come up with a big idea, something that would propel them to entrepreneurial success. And in order to get them thinking in the right way, each Saturday one of them would make smoothies for the whole group. The practical innovation is pretty clear. Instead of focusing on your killer idea to change the world, focus on helping others develop their killer ideas to change the world by getting them in the right mood. So they did. They went out, they collected from friends and neighbors £500. And this is the cool thing. They went to the Jazz on the Green concert in London and set up a booth. And then next to the booth, they had over 2 bins. Should we quit our day jobs to make smoothies? One bin was yes, one bin was no. At the end of the day, the yes bin was totally full, overflowing. The no bin had 1 bottle in it. I believe that's from the mother of one of those people who wants their son to give up advertising or consulting. In any case, and so they started their business. You know it. It's Innocent, and you might not know, Innocent's recorded turnover 196.4 million in 2012 and is growing at an annual rate of 50 to 60%. And it now supplies most of the major supermarkets. And in 2004 became Britain's leading brand. So I leave you again with the question, what do you do to get yourself in the mood for work? Pretty simple question. How can you help others do the same? 3, we're moving to Ireland now. What did you really get wrong and then find a way to get right? And this is a hard question, I know, for some people to answer. In workshops, I really have to get people admitting that there was something in their lives that they really got wrong at one point. If it's terrifying to think that, just let me tell you the story. But I'm sure all of us have had things in life that we got wrong. I know I could be a leader in that. Tons of things I've gotten wrong. So I'm telling the story of Georgie Smithick. And here's her story. I picked the wrong course in the wrong university. 6th year, and that's of secondary school, was hectic. I could focus only on getting the points, and with some luck, getting into university. Taking the decision to drop out wasn't easy. It was time-consuming, financially draining, and emotionally traumatic. And I think they left out the most important part of the quotation, emotionally traumatic for my parents, whom I'm sure were suffering much more than she was. So what do you do when you leave school and you want to go to university? Well, she desperately went around to ask students at one university after another about their courses and about whether they liked it. And it worked. She found that she wanted to go to Trinity. That's a little picture of Trinity University in Dublin. And then her practical innovation was to shift the focus from what's important, namely finding a university for her, to finding a way to provide student reviews for other people so that they can get it right the first time. Now, standardizing this was a bit tough, and you might think you have to be technologically savvy to do it, but what she did was she found a partner named Terry Clune who helped her create a site, and so they could get student reviews on the site. What she did. Terry Clune, by the way, is another practical innovator who did something very similar. I'll say it in a moment. In any case, I want to say, in her first 10 months, CourseHub.ie received 10,000 interviews. She's now a public figure in Ireland. She's on talk shows, and she is helping people get into university. What did you do really wrong? Then find a way to get right, and how can you help others do it? Very simple. By the way, it's a sort of two for the price of one. Terry Clune was, when he was a student, went to work in Germany. There's a year in Europe when people get a year off and they can go work. He went to work in Germany. A lot of his friends went to the United States, but they had the same experience. Their paycheck had huge amounts of taxes withheld. And in Germany, when he tried to file to get the money back, he found he couldn't do it, he didn't know how to do it. So he took an extra 2 weeks to figure it out, and then he realized, well, now that I know it, I can do it for Germany. Have to go find out how to do it in the United States, and then he opened a business called Tax Back that helps students get their taxes back. Again, what did you get really wrong, and then find a way to get right? 4. There are only 5 questions, so we're nearing dinner. Which of your ideas does everyone say is wrong? Again, this is a tough one in workshops because I find a lot of people, if they think people are going to say their idea is wrong, they just don't utter it. So it might be a question, which of your ideas do you refuse to utter because you're afraid people will tell you it's wrong? Dave Nicholson is pretty famous. He had an idea that everybody told him was wrong. Dave Nicholson came up with the idea with an online marketplace where people could borrow money directly from each other online. The idea was immediately dismissed by his friends. He pitched it again and again, but his friends kept saying, it's so obvious, why hasn't it been done before? And besides, why would anybody trust you and your site? Good question. Fortunately, he had a friend who helped him out, Giles Andrews. And Giles Andrews said, stop saying why your idea is good and think about how hard that is. Stop saying why your idea is good. Start saying why people want to stop doing what they're currently doing. And only then why your idea is good. Giles Andrews is currently the CEO of the company they founded together. And his point was, banking is a black box. And the way he said it was, banking is a black box and customers don't really know what happens. Give your money to Barclays in a savings account and God knows what happens to it. Is it going halfway around the world to buy some weird book of securities? Or is it being lent to a small business in Sheffield? I simply don't know. You don't either. And that became the point of the practical innovation. And as he put it, Both our lenders and our borrowers feel that they gain some sort of social capital by either lending money to people and doing some good, or by borrowing money and paying interest to real people rather than faceless institutions. So again, the practical innovation here is just to stop saying why you're so right, start saying why, in this case, banking is so wrong. What did they produce? They produced Zopa. And Zopa, peer-to-peer borrowing and lending. And by March 31st, 2014, Zopa had lent over £500 million with 52,000 savers and 80,000 borrowers, and received the supreme accolade that you can receive from the government when you do that in financial services. You're wondering what that is? They're now going to be regulated. The financial regulator is going to regulate them. So they've made it. They've made it. By the way, if you look up Zopa, the interest rates are quite good. So it is quite cool. Okay, so which of your ideas does everyone say is wrong? Last, and this is the one that we've used year after year in leadership development courses, and it seems to work the best, although there's a lot of kicking and screaming along the way. The question is, what is your industry getting wrong and you sometimes, rarely, but sometimes get right? And to illustrate it, I'm going to start with the cosmetics industry. And the interesting thing for me, as somebody who doesn't really pay attention to cosmetics all that closely, is when I was learning about it, is you start with a kind of ethical ideal in the cosmetics industry, particularly one for women who buy most of the cosmetics. And so one of those ethical ideals is pursuing love and a happy and exceptional life. I could be okay with that if I had a daughter saying to me, I want to pursue love and a happy and exceptional life. I think, okay, that's good. I like the exceptional life part the best. And then if you're in the cosmetic industry, you find somebody to embody that. And this is where you have to be good. Here she is. Now, if you're selling cosmetics to people who might want to pursue love and a happy and exceptional life, there's a pretty not so subtle message that you have to look like her. Oops. And that creates the anxiety on which cosmetics are sold. So Anita Roddick said, in response, what is your industry getting wrong? I hate the beauty industry. It is a monster selling unattainable dreams. It lies, it cheats, it exploits women. It drives a wedge between being sensuous and having dignity as a woman. Something the industry's getting wrong, pretty clearly. And she gave she created the famous doll, and this is what it is to be sensuous as a woman, she thinks. But what did she do immediately? Well, she was traveling around California, found herself in Berkeley in the 70s. It was a hotbed of political radicalism. And these two women, Peggy Short and Jane Saunders, set up a store in an old automobile body shop. That is, the shop where if you crashed your car, you took it to this body shop to have it repaired. It was in a kind of rough part of town. There was somebody else who was there in the 70s, so I can tell the story from direct experience. But the cool thing about this body shop is women could go in and they could try on various ecologically sound lotions as they wanted. That's now called interactive shopping. It wasn't done very much in the 70s at all. But everyone, including yours truly, thought this was something that would only happen in Berkeley. By the way, there was lots of Marxist literature in the store, and you can remember talking about the machine and all of the bad things that were going on. So everybody thought it was in Berkeley, and I was in on conversations where they said, do you really think maybe we can get it across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco? Maybe San Francisco. But no one at the time would ever have thought you could get it to San Jose. That was just totally out of San Jose, the beginnings of Silicon Valley at that point. So what she did was, again, she didn't take what was important, that was the political edginess of the thing. She said that experience could happen beyond, the People's Park area. You could reduce the political edge. You could change the rough location. You don't have to be with the people where the body shops are. And she kept the interactive shopping, plus a minimal feminist and ecological politics, and a nice clean place. Right? These were the things. It was sort of cleaning it up, the trivial things. The cool thing was reacting against the institutions, the man, and all of the rest. She made it simple. And by 2006, the Body Shop was a multi-local business with over 2,045 stores, serving 77 million customers in 51 different markets in 25 different languages and across 12 time zones. Pretty cool. So the question is, what is your industry getting wrong and you sometimes get right? I just want to emphasize this one. I'm sure every one of you sees something in your industry that it's getting wrong, and you just push it aside because you have to manage forward. Stop pushing it aside. So we're nearly at the end. I want you to think about which of the questions I've asked is your question. Which is the one that you would like to come up with an answer for? That would be a practical innovation. And it doesn't have to be as huge as the Body Shop. It can be a simple practical innovation that changes what people are doing at work every day. What action am I constantly chasing others to perform? Practical innovation. Make the inaction highly visible. Okay? 2, what do I do to get myself in the mood to work? Practical innovation. Shift the focus from work to getting into the mood. Extend it to everyone. By the way, there's one practical innovation that you can think of that most companies have adopted out of this. How many of you have morning huddles? Just a couple. Okay, very simple practical innovation that came out of that meeting. If you happen to meet with your friends at work in order to get yourself in the mood, a morning huddle is the natural thing. What did I really get wrong and then find a way to get right? Practical innovation, shift from solving your problem to making it easy for others to get right first. 4, which of my ideas does everyone say is wrong? Practical innovation, this is a curious one. Shift from saying why your idea is a good idea to why the normal thing is bad. And then innovate out of that. And last, what is my industry getting wrong that I sometimes get right? Practical innovation. Take the hard edge off. Remember, when you get this right, you're usually getting it right out of anger or resentment because you're fighting against your whole industry. Get rid of the resentment. Get rid of this is what Anita Roddick did. Get rid of all the Marxist politics around it and make the offering without that. All right, well, that's the talk. It's time for dinner. I'd like to thank you. Or do we do questions and answers?
No, I think we should go to dinner.
Let's go to dinner. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.